Riverside Park looked like exactly what it was on a Thursday night in October. Safe. The kind of safe that shows up in city council presentations when they talk about revitalization and property values and the future they're building for families who can afford to live near places like this. The fountain ran clean. The path stayed lit. 3 benches faced the water where ducks settled in for the night. And if you didn't know what to look for, you'd never see the bridge at the east end where the light doesn't quite reach. Under that bridge, a 14-year-old girl who hadn't slept indoors in 2 months was already moving before anyone else knew something was wrong. Her name was Iris Kane, and she carried a 7-year-old boy she'd never met before 3 miles through Pine Haven, North Carolina, on an October night when the temperature had dropped to 48 degrees and she only had one sleeve left on the army green hoodie that was the warmest thing she owned. The other sleeve was wrapped around the boy's right forearm, dark with blood, holding pressure on a wound that had opened when his head hit the concrete edge of the fountain at 8:41 in the evening, because 3 drunk 19-year-olds thought it would be funny to shove a kid they didn't know. By the time Iris walked through the emergency room doors at Pine Haven General Hospital at 9:23, her right arm was bare to the elbow in weather that could split skin, and her right palm was the same dark wet color as the makeshift bandage she'd torn from her own body, because a Red Cross pamphlet she'd found in the library's free bin 14 months ago had taught her that direct pressure stops bleeding and that sometimes moving someone is safer than leaving them where they fell. She had made that calculation in 90 seconds, counted them out while 3 men who just heard a child walked away laughing, their voices carrying across the October air like they owned it. She had waited under the bridge, hand pressed against a stranger's wound, counting in her head the way she'd learned to count everything now. Time, distance, risk. The specific mathematics of survival that nobody teaches you in 7th grade, but that become your entire curriculum when the world stops being a place that keeps you and becomes a place you have to read like a test you can't afford to fail. 90 seconds. That's how long it took for the men to get far enough away that Iris felt safe enough to move. Not because she was afraid for herself, though she was, but because she'd spent 2 years learning to read situations from 40 feet away in the dark. And what she'd read in those 3 men was anger that hadn't finished yet, the kind that looks for a reason to come back. So she counted. She held pressure. She watched the shapes move through the lit part of the park until they disappeared into the parking lot where a truck with the license plate BCAL 4739 started up and drove away. And only after the sound of the engine had faded and the park had returned to the rhythm of water and wind and the specific silence of a place pretending nothing had happened, did Iris Kane pick up a 7-year-old boy named Silas Mercer and start walking. She didn't ask for help. 2 years on the street teaches you that asking is a gamble that usually doesn't pay. So she just picked him up and started moving, and what she remembers most about the first mile isn't the weight of him or the cold or even the fear that she'd miscalculated the wound and that he might be worse than she thought. What she remembers is his voice, small and steady, asking her once if she was cold, and the way she'd answered not right now because the truth was complicated and he needed her to sound sure about something. The first person she passed was a man walking his dog on the lit path near the park's east gate. She was maybe 20 feet from him when he saw her. A teenage girl, one-sleeved, carrying a child with blood visible, even in the amber glow of the streetlights. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, then crossed to the other side of the path and kept walking. His dog pulled toward her, curious or concerned, or just doing what dogs do, but the man yanked the leash and didn't look back. Iris registered this the way she registered everything now. Data point, information. Confirmation of what she already knew, which was that people see what they're willing to see and nothing more. She kept moving. The second time she tried for help was at the red light on Garrison Road a mile into the walk. There was a car stopped at the intersection, a sedan with a woman behind the wheel lit by the glow of her phone. Iris ran to the passenger window, knocked on the glass, tried to show the boy's wound through the reflection and glare. The woman looked up, made eye contact, then hit the lock button. The light changed. The car drove. Iris stood on the corner for maybe 5 seconds, breathing hard, the boy heavier now than he'd been when she'd picked him up. Or maybe she was just more tired. Silas hadn't said anything during the run to the car, and he didn't say anything now. He'd figured out somewhere in the second mile that she needed to concentrate, and at 7 years old, he'd made the decision to let her. She kept moving. The third attempt cost her more than time. There was a convenience store on Pine Haven Avenue, bright and open, the kind of place that feels like help because it's lit up and there are people inside, and surely someone who works there will do something. She walked through the doors and the clerk behind the counter looked up and Iris said, "This boy is hurt. I need you to call someone." The clerk was maybe 22, thin, wearing a name tag that said Kevin. He looked at Silas, at the blood-soaked sleeve wrapped around his arm, at Iris standing there with one bare arm in October trying to hold it together. He said, "I'll call someone." She believed him. That was the mistake. She was still standing in the fluorescent brightness of the store, still trying to catch her breath when she heard Kevin on the phone behind her, describing her to what sounded like a non-emergency police line. "Yeah, there's a suspicious teenager here acting kind of erratic. She's got a hurt kid with her. I don't know what's going on, but she looks—" Iris left, walked out before he finished the sentence, before whoever was on the other end of that call could decide she was the problem instead of the solution, before the system that was supposed to help could do what it had done to her for 2 years, which was process her into something easier to ignore. That stop cost her 7 minutes and the last of her trust in strangers for the night. She walked the final mile and a half without trying to stop, without looking for help, just moving through the cold with a boy in her arms and the knowledge that she was the only thing standing between him and whatever happens to kids when nobody shows up. Silas asked once more if she was cold. This was in the third mile when her right arm had gone numb and her shoulders had started shaking and the hospital lights were finally visible in the distance, like a promise she was afraid to believe in. She said, "Not right now," again, and he didn't ask after that. 41 minutes after she picked him up under the East Bridge, Iris Kane walked through the automatic doors of Pine Haven General Hospital's emergency room, carrying a 7-year-old boy whose blood had soaked through the sleeve she'd torn from her own body and into the fabric of the hoodie she'd stolen from a donation box behind a church 6 months ago because it was warm and 2 sizes too big and nobody had been watching when she took it. There was a man in the lobby, tall, 50-something, leather vest over a flannel shirt, the kind of presence that makes a room feel smaller just by being in it. He was on his phone pacing the particular kind of motion that happens when you're trying to stay functional while your world is breaking into pieces you can't put back together. He heard a voice from across the lobby, small, exhausted, the specific relief of a child who has been holding himself together and is now done holding. "Daddy." The man turned. Iris was standing in the entrance, one sleeved, a dark stain across her right palm that matched the dark stain on the torn sleeve wrapped around the boy's arm. She was not steady on her feet, but she had not put the boy down. She looked at the man moving toward her, and she did not step back. She said 9 words. "He's yours. He's safe. I kept pressure on." She handed Silas to his father, then she sat down on the floor. Not dramatically, not crying. She just sat down because her legs had finished. They had carried a stranger's child 3 miles through a city that had stopped seeing her as a person worth stopping for, and now they were done and sitting with something she had spent 2 years learning she had to earn before she could take it. The man had Silas in his arms, was already calling for the intake nurse, was already doing the things you do when your child is injured and you're present enough to function. Then he stopped, looked at the girl on the floor, at the torn sleeve, at the bare arm in the October cold, at the right palm she was holding slightly away from her body, the way you hold something that hurts when you forget to hold it still. He handed Silas to the nurse who had materialized beside him. He crouched down in front of the girl on the floor. She was looking at the tile, not at him. Her left hand was in her jacket pocket, closed around something. He could see her fingers working whatever it was holding it, the way people hold things that matter more than they can explain. "You carried him," he said. 3 miles, she said. Not proud, not looking for credit, just accurate. From the park, East Bridge, I was under it when it happened. She looked up then. Her eyes did something complicated. The specific calculation of someone who has learned to measure whether a situation is safe before they commit to being in it. Whether this was one of the ones who would do something or one of the ones who wouldn't. They shoved him and he hit the fountain edge, she said. They left. I waited until they were gone and then I went to him. The man looked at her for a moment. Something was shifting behind his eyes. Some recognition that wasn't quite recognition, but was close enough to hurt. Why did you wait? He asked. Because there were three of them, Iris said as if this were obvious. And they were still angry. It was obvious. If you'd spent 2 years learning to survive in the spaces people don't look at, it was the most obvious thing in the world. You don't approach a threat that's still looking for a target. You wait, you count. You make sure the danger has passed before you step into the light, because stepping into the light when the danger is still present doesn't make you brave. It makes you dead. The man understood this in a way that made his jaw tighten. The girl who had carried his son 3 miles had assessed a threat, managed her own safety, treated a wound, and navigated to the nearest hospital, all before a single adult who should have been responsible for any of this had shown up. What's your name? He asked. Iris. He held the name for a second. Iris, what? Kane. Is there somewhere I need to take you, Ricky family? The pause that followed was not hesitation. It was the pause of someone who has a specific answer and is deciding whether the answer is safe to say out loud. Please don't let them send me back to 327 Birchwood, she said, not to him, to the floor, but loud enough. The man looked at her left hand in her pocket, at whatever she was holding on to in there. At the bare arm, at the scar along her jawline that had healed years ago, but had the specific quality of something that had not healed into nothing. Nobody's sending you anywhere tonight, he said. Stay right here. He stood, positioned himself between Iris and the lobby entrance, automatic without deciding to, pulled out his phone, made a call. I need you at Pine Haven General now, he said into the phone. Bring the others. His name was Jack Mercer. He was 52 years old and he had been the president of the Pine Haven chapter of the Hells Angels for 9 years. He had a scar on his left hand where the ring finger ended early, lost to a machine press when he was 19, before the years that had shaped him into the man standing in a hospital lobby in October, deciding that the girl on the floor was not leaving his sight until he understood what had put her there. He was still on the phone when the nurse came back from the treatment room where they'd taken Silas. She paused at the edge of the lobby, looked at the one-sleeved girl on the floor, at the large man in the leather vest standing between her and the entrance, like he was guarding something. The nurse's name was Dr. Elena Price. She was 49 years old and she had been working emergency medicine at Pine Haven General for 22 years. She had seen Iris Kane once before. 8 months ago, a fever visit, 103 degrees. The girl had walked in alone, answered the intake questions, alone sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes before Elena had found her, given her water, and ibuprofen, and a granola bar from the nurse's station because she looked like she hadn't eaten in a day. Elena had almost filed a report that night, almost called social services, almost done something more than give a sick kid some medicine and food and send her back out into whatever situation had brought her in alone with a fever that high. But she hadn't. She'd told herself the girl would be fine, that someone else was handling it, that it wasn't her responsibility to do more than treat the immediate medical need in front of her. She had thought about that night every Thursday shift for 8 months. And now here was the same girl, one-sleeved, sitting on the floor of the same emergency room, and Elena felt something complicated move through her chest that felt like recognition and regret and the specific shame of knowing you could have done more and didn't. She didn't say anything to her supervisor. She wasn't sure why. The protocols were clear, unaccompanied minor, possible abuse indicators. She should have been filling out paperwork right now, making calls, setting in motion the machinery that's supposed to protect children who show up in emergency rooms looking like they've been fighting wars. But something about the way the man in the leather vest was standing there, the way he'd positioned himself between the girl and the rest of the world, made Elena pause, made her decide to wait, to watch, to see what happened next, for she set the system in motion, because the system had rules and the rules were supposed to help. But Elena had worked in this hospital long enough to know that sometimes the rules just move people from one bad situation to another without ever asking what they actually needed. So she watched. Jack's first call went to a man named Owen Cross, 48 years old, former public defender, 16 years in housing and tenant law, before he'd decided the road was more honest than the courtroom. They called him Viper, not because he was cruel, but because he was sharp and he didn't waste movement. And when he decided something needed to be done, he did it with the kind of precision that came from years of fighting systems that protected themselves better than they protected people. Viper arrived in 9 minutes, walked into the lobby, saw Jack standing over a teenage girl on the floor, and sat down in the chair beside her without being told what he was looking at. He opened his phone and started searching before Jack had said a word. "Her name is Iris Kane," Jack said. "She's been on the Pine Haven Youth Shelter waiting list for 11 months. I need to know why that list hasn't moved." Viper's expression didn't change. His fingers did. They moved across the screen like he was picking a lock, which in a way he was. Public records, county databases, the digital paperwork trail that most people never look at because they don't know it exists or don't care enough to follow it. Viper knew it existed. He'd built a career following it. The second call went to Samuel Hayes, 55 years old, former Baptist youth minister, a man whose voice had the register of someone who had spent decades in rooms with people at their worst and had learned that the quality of silence matters as much as the quality of speech. They called him Shepherd, and he showed up 12 minutes after Jack called, carrying 2 bottles of water and the kind of presence that makes a space feel calmer just by being occupied. He didn't sit next to Iris. He sat across from her, one chair away, and set one of the water bottles on the table between them. "You want this?" he asked. Iris looked at the water, looked at him, nodded once. He slid it closer, didn't ask anything else. Just sat there reading a magazine he'd picked up from the waiting room rack, giving her space to exist without having to perform or explain or justify anything. 4 minutes passed like that. Quiet. Then Shepard asked, "You cold?" Iris looked at her bare right arm. "Yeah, I'll see what they have," Shepard said, and stood up and walked to the nurse's station and came back 3 minutes later with a heated blanket from the supply closet that he draped over her shoulders without ceremony. Iris pulled it tight around herself, and Shepard sat back down and went back to his magazine. Like this was normal, like keeping a teenage girl warm while she sat on a hospital floor was just something you did on a Thursday night in October. The third call brought Derek Sullivan, 43, the kind of man who could work a county bureaucracy like a lockpick because he'd spent 20 years learning which doors opened when you asked nicely and which ones needed leverage. They called him Chains, not because he bound things, but because he knew how to link them. Systems, people, resources. He could connect a need to a solution faster than most people could identify the problem, and he'd heard enough on the phone driving over to know what the problem was before he walked through the doors. "There's one emergency placement bed at Pine Haven Youth Shelter," he said, passing Jack and the lobby phone still to his ear. "Opened up 47 minutes ago. Auto assigns to the next name on the list in," he checked his watch, "43 minutes now, I'm working it." He walked to the far corner of the lobby and kept talking quiet and precise to whoever was on the other end of the line. Jack didn't ask who. Chains had contacts in places most people didn't know had contacts to have. Social services, housing authority, church networks. The web of systems that were supposed to catch people who were falling and that mostly just caught them long enough to categorize them before letting them drop. The fourth arrival was Carl Trent, 50 years old, 11 years at the IRS before the road took him, and he'd never lost the particular patience of a man who believes all the answers are in the documents if you know where to look. They called him Numbers, and he showed up with a laptop already open, already pulling county Housing Authority minutes from the public record portal while he walked, his eyes scanning rows of data the way other people scan faces. He sat at the far end of the waiting room and didn't introduce himself, just started building spreadsheets, cross-referencing dates and names and budget allocations and all the small pieces of bureaucratic machinery that most people never see, but that determine who gets help and who gets processed into the category of people who don't. The fifth man through the door was Nathan Morrison, 46 former DSS caseworker. Last known professional address, a county office 40 miles from Pine Haven, where he'd been reassigned after filing a complaint that was never investigated. He arrived carrying a folder under his arm. He'd been keeping that folder for 2 years, waiting for a reason to open it in the right room. He looked at Iris on the floor, Jack standing guard at the four other men who'd assembled without fanfare or explanation, and he set the folder on the table in front of Viper. Case documentation, he said, housing allocation irregularities, filed 26 months ago, never acted on. Viper opened it, started reading. His jaw did something subtle that wasn't quite a smile but was close. You might expect 6 men mobilizing around a teenage girl they'd never met to look like chaos. It didn't. It looked like people arriving in sequence, each one already knowing their job before they walked through the door. It looked like chains on a phone in the corner, quiet and precise. Viper building a legal timeline on his phone screen. Numbers pulling public records on a laptop. Shepard sitting across from a 14-year-old who hadn't been asked what she wanted by a trustworthy adult in 2 years. It looked like competence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Jack came back to Iris 20 minutes after the last brother had arrived. Silas had been taken to a treatment room. He was conscious, stable, annoyed about the stitches he was going to need, asking for a specific brand of juice box that the hospital didn't carry. The nurse who had taken him back had recognized Iris from 8 months ago and was currently standing outside the treatment room trying to decide whether to say something to her supervisor about the girl in the lobby and the men who had gathered around her like they were protecting something. Jack sat down across from Iris. Shepard moved one seat away to give them room. "Tell me about the notebook," Jack said. Iris looked at her left pocket. Her hand was still in it, still holding whatever she'd been holding since she walked in. She pulled it out slowly. It was a notebook. Small, maybe 5 by 7 inches, with a waterlogged cover and a spine that had been reinforced with electrical tape. The kind of thing that's been carried everywhere and has survived because someone decided it was worth protecting. "I write things down," Iris said. "I've been doing it since I left home. I write what I see, what I hear, dates, addresses, things people say." She paused. "My teacher in 7th grade told me I had a good memory. She said I should write things down so they're not just in my head." "What teacher?" Jack asked. "Mrs. Eleanor Voss, Pine Haven Middle School, 7th grade English." The specificity of it landed between them like a small, heavy thing. A name from a classroom, a teacher who had said something to a student who remembered it. That was 2 years and a world ago. 6 weeks ago, Iris said. "I was sleeping behind the building on Garrison Road. The property company, the big one, it's warm there at night. The HV Ace exhaust." She opened the notebook to a page about a third of the way through. The handwriting was careful despite obvious difficulty. She'd written slowly, deliberately, the way you write when you know you only get one try. "A man came out the back door around midnight. He was on his phone. I wrote it down in the dark after he went back inside. I couldn't see the page, but I can write without looking if I go slow enough." Jack took the notebook, read the entry, read it twice. The writing was shaky but legible. Someone learning to document in conditions that don't allow for documentation. The entry was dated, timed, specific. "Behind Garrison Property Building, 12:47 a.m. Man 50's gray hair, expensive coat on phone. Heard $378, 400. Casey tried to make noise system, processed him. 23 beds on hold until Riverside closes. Dark. Wrote by feel after he went inside. Couldn't see what I was writing." There was a laminated photograph tucked between the pages. A school photo. A girl in a blue shirt, hairbrush, smiling at the camera with the kind of smile you give when someone tells you to. Seventh grade. The lamination was the cheap kind you can do at the library for 50 cents. She'd protected this photo the same way she'd protected the notebook, carried it everywhere. Jack looked at the photo, looked at the girl sitting across from him. The same person 2 years apart, and the distance between those two versions felt like something you could measure in miles. $378,400, Jack said. I didn't know what that was, Iris said. I knew it was a lot, and he said a name. Casey. He said Casey tried to make noise and the system processed him. She met Jack's eyes. What does processed mean? Jack set the notebook carefully. He looked at his left hand, at the place where the ring finger ended, the space that had been there since he was 19. He looked at it the way he sometimes did when he needed to say something accurate. My sister, he said. Her name was Lily. She disappeared when she was 14. He said it without performance, just the fact of it. I was 24. My mother called me with a case number and a detective's name. The case closed 11 months later. They never found her. A pause. She'd be 42 now. I still don't know what processed means. Iris was very still. I'm sorry, she said. I'm telling you, Jack said, because I need you to understand something. When I look at you, what you did tonight, what you've been carrying, I'm not going to look away. That's not something I'm capable of anymore. He picked up the notebook again. This name, Casey, the number, the address. I need you to walk me through everything you heard, and then I need to make some calls. Iris looked at him for a long moment, the measuring look, the one she'd been running on every adult, every situation, every door before she decided whether to walk through it. She decided. Okay, she said, but first the shelter bed. Chains said 47 minutes. Jack looked across to the lobby. Chains was still on the phone, but he must have felt the attention because he turned, held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes, Jack said up to Iris. Handled. Iris exhaled once, slowly, the specific exhale of someone releasing one thing while still holding everything else. Then she opened the notebook to the first page and started from the beginning. The notebook had 42 entries. Iris walked Jack through the first 6 while the brothers worked in the periphery of the hospital lobby like a machine that had learned to run quietly. Viper on his phone building a legal framework from public records. Numbers on his laptop tracking money through systems designed to hide it. Chain still talking to someone about a shelter bed that was supposed to open 43 minutes ago and now had maybe 6 minutes left before it auto-assigned to whoever was next on a list that hadn't moved in almost a year. Shepard sat across from Iris, not watching, not listening, just present. The kind of presence that doesn't ask for anything. Jack read each entry twice. The handwriting changed depending on conditions. Some entries were neat, written in daylight at the library. Others were shakier, written in darkness or cold or fear. But all of them were dated. All of them were specific. A 14-year-old girl who'd spent 2 years learning that details matter when nobody believes you. Entry 1 was the phone call behind Garrison property. The $378,000. Casey's name. The system processing people who made noise. Entry 2 was 4 weeks later. Iris had followed the man from entry 1, written down his license plate, black Mercedes Fosse, A8291 Schween. She'd gone to the library the next day, used the public computer to search the plate through a DMF database she shouldn't have known how to access, but had figured out anyway because when you're living outside, you learn things. The car was registered to Victor Ashford. The building directory at Garrison Property listed Ashford Development, LLC, on the 3rd floor. Entry 3 was research. Ashford Development had purchased 4 land parcels in Pine Haven over the past 18 months, all of them within 300 feet of the shelter zone. The city council had a vote scheduled for November 15th on something called the Riverside Development per Transfer. Iris had cross-referenced this with her own position on the shelter waiting list and noted that the timing seemed significant in ways she didn't fully understand but wanted documented. Entry 4 was the waiting list itself. She'd accessed it through the county website. Public record, technically though, buried under enough bureaucratic layers that most people would never find it. She was number 8, had been number 8 for the past 3 months. Before that, she'd been number 11 for 8 months. The 7 names ahead of her hadn't moved in the entire time she'd been watching. She checked every week. Same names, same order. The system was frozen and nobody seemed to notice or care. Entry 5 was another overheard conversation. City Hall this time. Iris had been sleeping near the loading dock because it was warmer than the bridge and quieter than the park. 6 in the morning, Ashford on his phone again. Hollis has it handled. Housing Authority won't move the list until I close. She'd written down the name. Garrett Hollis, researched him that afternoon. Housing Authority Allocation Coordinator. The man who decided who got beds and who kept waiting. Entry 6 was from earlier today. 3 men harassing someone near the bridge. Same men who'd harassed a homeless veteran named Ricky 2 weeks prior. Iris had documented them then too. OSU Beaver shirts. Truck plate BKL4739. Tonight they'd been drinking since 8:15. She'd noted the time, the behavior, the escalation. Had written that if they came back, she'd need to avoid the 8:30 to 10 p.m. window because they were getting aggressive and she wasn't sure they'd leave her alone if they saw her. Then they'd push Silas and everything had changed. Jack set the notebook down when she finished walking him through the entries. Numbers had moved closer during the recitation, was standing behind Jack's shoulder, now looking at the pages with the expression of someone who'd just found something they had been looking for without knowing they were looking. These dates, Numbers said, pointing at entry 5. The timeline here. Can I see the rest? Iris handed him the notebook. He flipped through it carefully, not reading every entry, but scanning dates, cross-referencing them against something in his head. 30 seconds of silence while he calculated. The freeze on the shelter allocation list started 18 months ago, Numbers said. First parcel acquisition by Ashford Development happened 16 months ago. Second parcel 14 months ago. He looked at Jack. She's tracking a pattern. He's been clearing the area, making it look abandoned, so the city council approves the development transfer. By keeping shelter beds empty, Viper said. He'd stopped his own research to listen. If the beds are frozen, homeless population stays visible in the wrong areas. City calls it a crisis. Ashford positions himself as the solution with his development project. Council approves the transfer because it looks like revitalization. And anyone on the waiting list just keeps waiting, Jack said. 23 beds, Iris said quietly. I counted them. The shelter has capacity for 52. Only 29 are listed as active. The other 23 show as under administrative review. Have for 11 months. The lobby was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that happens when people are understanding something they don't want to understand. You did this alone? Jack asked. Had to, Iris said. Nobody listens to a homeless kid without proof. I needed proof nobody could ignore. You have it, Viper said. He was looking at his phone screen at something he had pulled up while Iris was talking. County records show a payment of $23,600 to something called Garrison Advisory Group, LLC. Consulting services for the Housing Authority. Approved 18 months ago. Let me see that, Numbers said. Viper handed him the phone. Numbers looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. Garrison Advisory Group was incorporated 22 months ago. Registered agent is a lawyer named Cecil Dunbar. Who's that? Jack asked. Ashford's lawyer, Numbers said, handled all 4 parcel acquisitions, which means Ashford set up a shell company, funneled county money into it through a consulting contract, and used that money to fund his land purchases while simultaneously freezing the shelter beds to make the area look like it needed his development project. He handed the phone back to Viper, looked at Iris. You built 80% of a federal case in 6 weeks, sleeping under a bridge. Iris didn't respond to that. She was looking at her hands. At the right palm that had been holding pressure on Silas's wound for 41 minutes, and was starting to show the specific soreness that comes after adrenaline fades and your body remembers it's been hurt. Chains appeared from the corner of the lobby. He walked directly to Jack, didn't sit, just stood there with his phone in his hand. Shelter bed is confirmed, he said. She's in. Placement starts tonight. I have a name and a direct number for the intake coordinator. She's expecting Iris within the hour. Iris looked up at that. Something in her face changed. Not relief exactly, something smaller and harder to name. The feeling of a door opening when you've been standing in the cold so long, you'd forgotten what doors were for. Thank you, she said. Chains nodded once and walked back to his corner. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at Iris with an expression that was hard to read but felt like it had weight. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to tell me the truth. Iris waited. What do you need? Jack asked. Not what you think you are supposed to need, not what sounds right. What do you actually need right now? Iris looked at him for a long time, the measuring look again. The calculation she'd been running on every adult for 2 years. But something was different this time. Something in the way Jack is asking the question. Like he actually wanted to know the answer. Like the answer mattered more than the next thing he was planning to say. I need to finish this, Iris said finally. The notebook has 6 weeks, but I need more. More what? More entries, more proof. She paused. I have Ashford on the phone behind his building. I have the money trail numbers just found. I have the waiting list, but I don't have proof that Garrett Hollis took orders from Ashford. I don't have the names of the other 22 people on that waiting list. And I don't have proof of what happened to Casey Brennan when he complained. She looked at Jack directly. I need to interview Garrett Hollis, and I need you to get me in the room. Jack sat back. You're 14. I know. He's not going to talk to you. Yes, he will, Iris said, because I'm nobody. That's my advantage. He'll talk to me because he won't think I matter. The logic of it was sound in a way that made Jack's chest hurt. A 14-year-old who'd learned to weaponize being invisible, who'd turned 2 years of being overlooked into a strategy for getting the truth out of someone who'd never tell it to anyone who actually had power. Viper spoke from across the lobby. If she's wired anything he says is admissible, but she's a minor, we need consent. From who? Jack asked. From her, Viper said, and from whoever has legal authority to make decisions on her behalf. Nobody has that authority, Iris said. I'm on a waiting list. I don't have a caseworker. I don't have a guardian. I have a DSS file that got closed after 9 days because my foster father answered the door and said I was fine. She said it without emotion, just fact. So the consent is mine to give, she added, and I'm giving it. Jack looked at Viper. Viper looked at his phone, scrolling through something that was probably case law or precedent or the kind of legal framework that determines what's allowed and what isn't. After a moment, he nodded. It'll hold, Viper said. She's right. Without an active case or a legal guardian, she can consent on her own behalf. It's messy, but it's defensible. Then we do it, Jack said. He looked at Iris. But you don't do it alone. I'm in the room. Viper's in the room, and the second you want out, you say the word and we're gone. Iris nodded. When? She asked. Jack checked his watch. It was 11:47. Hollis won't talk tonight. He's scared. Probably knows Ashford is about to go down and he's trying to figure out how to distance himself. We let him sit with that fear overnight. Tomorrow morning early, we make contact. Give him a choice. Talk to us or talk to the FBI. He'll choose FBI, Iris said. No, he won't, Jack said, because the FBI is an institution. We're just people, and cowards always think they can negotiate with people. There was something in the way Jack said it that suggested he had had this conversation before. Maybe more than once. The specific knowledge that comes from years of reading situations and understanding that most people aren't evil, they're just scared. And scared people make predictable choices if you know what they're scared of. Across the lobby, Dr. Elena Price was still standing outside the treatment room, where they'd taken Silas. She'd been watching the gathering in the waiting area for the past 20 minutes, watching the way the men had assembled around the girl without fanfare, the way they'd each taken a role without being told, the way Jack Mercer had crouched down beside Iris and stayed there not performing comfort, but just present. Elena had made a decision about 8 months ago when Iris had come in with a fever and Elena had given her medicine and food and sent her back out into whatever situation had brought her there alone. Elena had told herself it wasn't her job to do more, that someone else was handling it, that the system would catch this kid if she really needed catching. She'd been wrong, and she'd known she was wrong every Thursday shift since then. Every time she saw a case that looked like Iris's, every time she had the opportunity to do more and defaulted to doing the minimum because the minimum was easier and because the system made it easy to tell yourself the minimum was enough. She walked across the lobby, stopped in front of Shepard, who looked up from his magazine with the kind of patient attention that made people feel like whatever they were about to say mattered. "I know her," Elena said. "The girl, Iris. She came in 8 months ago, fever, 103. I gave her ibuprofen and a granola bar, and I let her leave." Shepard didn't respond immediately, just waited. "I didn't file a report," Elena continued. "I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that someone else was handling it, that she'd be fine." Her hands were working her hospital badge lanyard, twisting it between her fingers. "I checked the waiting list after that night," she said. "She was number 11. I told myself that meant someone was handling it, that she'd get placed eventually, that the system worked." She looked at Shepard, then at Iris sitting 10 feet away with Jack. 8 months, Elena said. "She moved from 11 to 8 in 8 months. And I knew the list wasn't moving, and I told myself it wasn't my domain." Shepard set his magazine down. "You telling me this because you want absolution or because you have information?" "Both," Elena said, "but mostly the second one." She sat down, took a breath. "There's something else." The man whose name showed up in Iris's notebook. Victor Ashford. He came through this ER 8 months ago. Different night from when Iris was here, but same week. "What was he doing here?" Shepard asked. "Visiting a patient, supposedly, but he stopped at the nurse's station, introduced himself to the charge nurse, knew her by her first name, and he asked her a question." "What question?" "He asked if the hospital tracked homeless minors who came through the ER, said it was a community health question. The charge nurse said we kept intake records. Ashford said that was good to know." Shepard was very still. "You think he was using hospital records to monitor who might complain about the housing situation?" "I think he was building a surveillance system," Elena said. "And I think my intake note from Iris's fever visit 8 months ago mentioned that she'd asked about the shelter waiting list, which means he saw it, which means he knew she existed, which means he deliberately kept her at number 8 to watch if she'd escalate the complaint." She looked at Shepard directly. "I want to give a formal statement, tonight, to whoever is handling this. Because I should have filed a report 8 months ago, and I didn't, and maybe if I had, she wouldn't have spent the last 8 months sleeping under a bridge." Shepard pulled out his phone, texted someone. 30 seconds later, numbers walked over. "She has information," Shepard said, "about Ashford using ER records to track homeless kids. You'll want to document it." Numbers sat down, opened a notes app on his phone, and looked at Elena. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Don't leave anything out." Elena talked for 15 minutes, every detail she could remember. The date of Ashford's visit, the charge nurse's name, the exact wording of the question about tracking minors, the intake note from Iris's fever visit that mentioned the shelter waiting list, the fact that Iris had moved from 11 to 8 right around the time Ashford would have seen that note, the specific pattern of him showing up at the hospital asking questions that seemed innocuous but weren't building relationships with staff who had access to information about vulnerable populations. When she finished, Numbers had 3 pages of notes and a timeline that connected Ashford's ER visit to Iris's stalled position on the waiting list in a way that felt less like coincidence and more like strategy. "This is good," Numbers said. "This is really good. You willing to repeat this to a federal investigator?" "Yes," Elena said. "Tonight." "Yes." Numbers made a call, spoke quietly for 2 minutes, hung up. "FBI agent is coming," he said. "Financial Crimes Division. He'll want to take your statement formally, probably take a couple hours." Elena nodded. She looked over at Iris again. The girl was talking to Jack, showing him something else in the notebook. Her right arm was still bare where the sleeve had been torn off. The heated blanket Shepard had brought her was draped over her shoulders, but she'd pushed it back when she started talking, too focused on the notebook to remember she was cold. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said to Shepard. "Sure. Who are you people? I mean, I know who Jack Mercer is. Everyone in Pine Haven knows the Hells Angels. But this?" She gestured at the lobby at the men working in quiet coordination. "This doesn't look like what I expected." Shepard smiled slightly. "We're just people who decided looking away wasn't an option anymore." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer that matters," Shepard said. "Jack lost someone when he was young. His sister never found her. Spent 28 years looking. You do that long enough, you start recognizing the shape of absence in other people. You see a kid who's been made invisible, and you can't unsee it, so you do something. That's all this is." Elena sat with that for a moment. "What happens to her now?" she asked. To Iris. "Tonight she goes to a shelter, gets a bed, gets warm, gets safe," Shepard said. "Tomorrow we finish what she started. Make sure the people who kept her invisible answer for it. And after that she decides. She's been making her own decisions for 2 years, kept herself alive, kept herself moving. She doesn't need us to tell her what to do next. She just needs us to make sure she has options." Across the lobby, Jack stood up, looked at the assembled brothers. Each of them looked back, a silent check-in that didn't need words. "We're going to talk to Garrett Hollis in the morning," Jack said. "Early, before he's awake enough to be smart about it. Iris is going to ask the questions. We're going to make sure he answers them." He looked at Iris. "You good with that?" She nodded. "You sure? Because you can change your mind. You can let us handle it. You've done enough." "I need to finish it," Iris said. "I started it. I need to see it through." "Okay," Jack said. "Then we move at 6 a.m. Get some sleep between now and then." Chains stepped forward. "I'll drive her to the shelter. Make sure intake goes smooth." Iris stood up slowly, the heated blanket falling from her shoulders. She picked up the notebook, held it for a moment, then handed it to Jack. "You'll need this," she said, "for evidence." Jack took it. "I'll keep it safe." "I know," Iris said. There was trust in that. The kind that's earned, not given. Jack felt the weight of it like a physical thing. Iris walked toward the exit with Chains, stopped halfway, turned back. "The other 22 people on the list," she said. "The ones who are still waiting. Can you find them? Already started," Numbers said. He held up his phone, showing a spreadsheet with names and last known addresses. "I'll have contact information by morning. We'll get them placed." Iris nodded, then she left. The lobby felt different after she was gone. Emptier. Like something that had been holding the space together had walked out, and now they were just men sitting in a hospital waiting room at midnight, trying to figure out what happened and what happened next. Jack sat down in the chair Iris had vacated, opened the notebook, started reading from the beginning, slowly this time, taking in every detail. The brothers gathered around him without being asked. Viper over his shoulder. Numbers to his left with the laptop open. Shepard across from him, Chains back from walking Iris out. They read in silence for 20 minutes. Built a timeline. Connected dots. Found the pattern that Iris had been documenting for 6 weeks without anyone asking her to. Victor Ashford had spent 18 months building a system. Not a crime exactly, a system. He'd created a shell company, funneled county money through it, used that money to buy land near the shelter zone. Then he'd frozen the shelter beds to make the area look abandoned, make the homeless crisis look worse than it was, make the city council desperate enough to approve his development transfer. And anyone who tried to complain, anyone who'd made noise like Casey Brennan, had got processed, got their benefits redirected, got pushed out of town or into situations so desperate they stopped complaining because survival took all their energy. It was elegant in a way that made Jack's stomach turn. The kind of evil that doesn't look like evil because it's wearing a suit and showing up at city council meetings and talking about revitalization and community development and the future we're building for our children. We need to find Casey Brennan, Jack said. Already did, Chain said. He held up his phone. Asheville, North Carolina, working at an automotive shop. Left Pine Haven 2 years ago. Why'd he leave? Because someone was redirecting his foster care stipend and he couldn't prove it and he was scared. Stop making noise because noise made things worse. Jack was quiet for a moment. How much did Ashford take from him? Number scrolled through something on his laptop. $69,930 over 27 months. Foster care stipend plus housing assistance, all redirected through the same shell company. So Casey tried to complain, Jack said. System ignored him, Ashford stole from him, and Casey ran because running was safer than staying. That's what it looks like, Number said. Jack closed the notebook, set it on the table like it was fragile. Tomorrow morning we talk to Hollis, he said. Iris asked the questions. He gives us the names of the other 22 people on that list. He tells us exactly how Ashford gave him orders. He tells us everything. And then we make sure what happened to Casey Brennan doesn't happen to anyone else. He looked at each brother individually. This isn't about revenge. It's not about making someone pay. It's about 23 people who got kept invisible while a man built a real estate empire on top of them. We make them visible. We make sure they get what they should have gotten 11 months ago. That's the job. Viper spoke up. I'll have the legal framework ready by morning. Emergency motion to freeze the city council vote. We cite Iris's notebook as documentary evidence. Judge will sign it if we move fast enough. How fast, Jack asked. Before Ashford knows we're moving. Before he can destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. I'll file it at 3 a.m. Judge Martinez owes me a favor from a case 11 years ago. She'll sign. Do it, Jack said. Numbers closed his laptop. I'll have the financial breakdown ready by morning. Every dollar Ashford moved through that shell company, every parcel he bought, every payment the county made that ended up in his pocket, it'll be airtight. Chains, Jack said. Other 22 people on the waiting list. How fast can you get them placed? 16 I can place by Friday, Chains said, through emergency allocations and church networks. The other 6 need county coordination. I'll have it by end of week. Spike, Jack said. Your old complaint, the one that got you reassigned. Can we reopen it? Spike pulled the folder from under his arm, set it on the table. Already planning on it. Soon as we have Hollis's statement, this goes to the state ethics board. They'll have to investigate, and when they do, they'll find a pattern going back 2 years. Jack nodded, looked at Shepard. What do you need from me? Shepard asked. Keep an eye on Iris. Make sure the shelter placement goes smooth. Make sure she knows we're not going anywhere. Done. Jack stood, looked at the clock on the wall. It was 12:33 in the morning. In 5.5 hours, they'd be sitting across from Garrett Hollis in a diner parking lot, watching a coward decide whether to tell the truth or try to save himself. Get some rest, Jack said. We move at 6. The brothers dispersed. Viper to his car to start drafting the emergency motion. Numbers to compile the financial data. Chains to make calls about placement beds. Spike to prepare his complaint documentation. Shepard to check in with the shelter and make sure Iris had everything she needed. Jack stayed in the lobby, sat there with the notebook in his hands reading through it one more time. 42 entries, 6 weeks of a 14-year-old girl documenting a crime that nobody else had seen because nobody else had been looking from where she was looking. He thought about Lily, about the database search he did every Monday morning. 28 years of searching for someone who disappeared when she was exactly the age Iris was now. 28 years of finding nothing, of living with the specific grief of not knowing, of understanding that the system that was supposed to protect people like his sister had failed in ways that were both catastrophic and completely ordinary. He told himself for years that the searching mattered because someday he might find her, might get an answer, might know what happened. But sitting here in a hospital lobby at almost 1 in the morning with a notebook written by a girl who'd been invisible for 2 years, Jack understood something different. The searching mattered because it taught him to recognize absence, to see the shape of people who'd been erased, to understand that most disappearances don't look dramatic. They look like a name stuck at number 8 on a waiting list. They look like a girl sleeping under a bridge because 23 beds are frozen for reasons nobody questions. They look like systems working exactly as they're designed to work, which is to say, protecting themselves better than they protect people. He couldn't find Lily, but he could make sure Iris didn't disappear. Jack put the notebook in his jacket pocket, stood up, walked out to his bike. The October night was cold and clear, 48 degrees, the kind of cold that reminds you winter is coming whether you're ready or not. He thought about a girl walking 3 miles in this cold with one bare arm and a stranger's child in her other arm. Thought about the 90 seconds she had counted before deciding it was safe to move. Thought about 2 years of learning to survive in spaces that weren't supposed to be survivable. He started the bike. The engine caught, settled into the rhythm he'd known for 30 years. Tomorrow morning, they'd finish what Iris started, make Garrett Hollis talk, get the names of the other 22 people, build the case that would bring down Victor Ashford and everyone who'd helped him. But tonight, right now, all that mattered was that a 14-year-old girl who'd been sleeping under a bridge for 2 months was going to sleep in a bed, was going to be warm, was going to be safe. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance against 2 years of what she'd survived. But it was something, and sometimes something is all you get to work with. Jack rode home through empty streets. The city looked different at this hour, quieter, like it was holding its breath. Tomorrow it would wake up and start moving again, and most people would never know that something had shifted in the night, that a girl had carried a boy 3 miles, and in doing so had set in motion a series of events that would expose a system built on keeping people invisible. Most people would never know, but the 23 people on that waiting list would know. Casey Brennan in Asheville would know, and Iris Kane, wherever she was right now, already knew. That was enough. Jack parked the bike, went inside, set the notebook on his kitchen table next to his phone and his keys and the other ordinary objects that make up a life. In 5 hours, he'd wake up, make coffee, call the brothers, drive to a diner parking lot, and watch a 14-year-old girl make a coward tell the truth. But for now, he sat at the table, opened the notebook one more time, read the first entry again. A girl writing in the dark about a man on a phone talking about money and names and systems that process people. Writing without being able to see the page because she knew even then that this mattered, that someone needed to be paying attention. That invisible didn't mean gone. Jack closed the notebook, stood up, walked to his bedroom. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The diner parking lot was empty at 5:47 in the morning, except for a single sedan parked under a light that had burned out sometime in the last week. Garrett Hollis sat in the driver's seat with his hands on the steering wheel, not moving, not starting the car, just sitting there like he was trying to decide if he was really going to do this or if he still had time to drive away and pretend the phone call he'd gotten at 5:15 hadn't happened. The call had been from Nathan Morrison. Spike. A voice Hollis hadn't heard in 2 years, not since he'd helped get Morrison reassigned to a county office 40 miles away after Morrison had filed a complaint about irregularities in the housing allocation system. The call had been short, had said they needed to talk, had said it would be better to talk now voluntarily before other people started asking questions in ways that wouldn't feel like questions. Hollis was 53 years old, had worked for the county for 19 years, had a pension that would vest in 11 months if he could just make it 11 more months without anything going wrong. He told himself for the past 18 months that nothing was going wrong, that what Victor Ashford had asked him to do wasn't illegal, just administrative, just holding some emails, just keeping beds in review status instead of available status. Nobody was getting hurt because the beds weren't real beds. They were just numbers in a database, and numbers couldn't feel pain. He told himself this enough times that he'd almost believed it, almost convinced himself that the girl who'd have been stuck at number 8 for 3 months wasn't a real person with a real name who was really sleeping outside while he held emails that would have given her a place to sleep. Then last night it happened. Victor Ashford arrested at his home, federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, and Hollis had sat in his own kitchen watching the news and understanding with absolute clarity that he was next, that there was no version of this where he walked away clean, that the only question left was how bad it was going to get. The passenger door of his car opened. A man slid into the seat beside him. Large, early 50s leather vest. Jack Mercer. Everyone in Pine Haven knew who Jack Mercer was. President of the local Hells Angels chapter. The kind of man who showed up in police reports, in city council meetings, and the sorts of stories people told about justice that came from outside official channels. "Thanks for coming," Jack said. Hollis didn't respond. His hands were still on the steering wheel. "You know why we called you," Jack said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know anything," Hollis said. "Yes, you do." The back door opened. Another person got in. Hollis looked in the rearview mirror and his stomach dropped. It was a girl, maybe 14, maybe 15, one-sleeved hoodie, dark hair pulled back. She was carrying a notebook. "This is Iris Kane," Jack said. "She was number 8 on your waiting list for 3 months. Number 11 for 8 months before that." Hollis looked at the girl in the back seat. She looked back at him with eyes that weren't angry, weren't accusing, were just measuring him the way you'd measure something you needed to understand before you could decide what to do with it. "Hi, Mr. Hollis," Iris said. Her voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that comes from practice. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I think we can help each other." Hollis didn't know what to say to that. The script he'd been running in his head since the phone call this morning had involved lawyers and denials and the careful language of institutional defense. It hadn't involved a teenage girl in a parking lot saying they could help each other. "Victor Ashford was arrested last night," Iris continued. "You know that? You probably also know you're next. FBI is going to come to your office probably today, maybe tomorrow. They're going to ask you about the shelter allocation system, about why 23 beds have been frozen for 11 months, about who told you to freeze them." She paused. "You can wait for them to ask, or you can talk to me now. And if you talk to me, I'll tell the FBI you cooperated before they came looking, that you helped, and that matters." Hollis turned around in his seat to look at her directly. "Why would you do that? Why would you help me?" "Because I don't think you're like Ashford," Iris said. "I think you made a mistake because you were scared. Because you have a pension coming and you didn't want to lose it. Because someone with more power than you told you to do something and you did it because saying no felt dangerous." She opened the notebook, showed him a page. "But I need something from you," she said. "I need the names of the other 22 people on that list. The ones who should have gotten beds in the last 11 months and didn't. And I need you to tell me exactly how Ashford told you to hold those beds. Every conversation, every email, every detail." Hollis looked at the notebook, at the careful handwriting, at an entry dated 6 weeks ago that described a phone conversation behind a building at midnight that he hadn't known anyone was listening to. "You wrote this?" he asked. "Yes." "In the dark?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment, saw something in her face that reminded him uncomfortably of his own daughter when she was that age, before college, before she'd moved to Charlotte and stopped calling except on holidays. The same directness, the same refusal to accept easy answers. "What guarantee do I have," he asked, "that you'll do what you said, that you'll tell the FBI I helped?" Iris pulled out a phone, the kind of prepaid phone you buy at a convenience store. "This conversation is being recorded. Your cooperation is documented. When the FBI calls, I'll give them this recording, and I'll tell them you talked to me voluntarily before they asked, that you provided information that helped us find the other 22 people on the list." She paused. "But only if you actually help, only if you tell the truth. If you lie, if you hold back, the recording stops being evidence of cooperation and starts being evidence of obstruction." Hollis sat with that. The logic was sound, ruthless but sound. This girl had built a trap and baited it with the one thing he needed, which was a way out that didn't involve losing everything. "Okay," he said. "What do you want to know?" Iris took out a pen, opened the notebook to a blank page. "Start from the beginning," she said. "When did Ashford first contact you?" Garrett Hollis talked for 38 minutes. Started 18 months ago when Ashford had called him at work. Said he needed a favor. Said he was working on a development project that would be good for Pine Haven, good for the community, good for everyone, but the timing was delicate. He needed the shelter allocation list to stay frozen for a few months, just until the city council vote happened, just until the optics were right. Hollis had asked what that meant, freezing the list. Ashford had explained it simply. "Don't send the allocation emails. Keep the beds showing as under administrative review." The people on the waiting list wouldn't know the difference. They just think the system was slow. And it was slow anyway, right? So what was a few more months? Hollis had said yes, had told himself it was temporary, that it wasn't really hurting anyone because the people on the list were already waiting. So what difference did it make if they waited a little longer? 2 months became 4, 4 became 6, 6 became 11. And every time Hollis thought about stopping, about sending the emails and moving people off the list, Ashford would call, would remind him about the pension, about how county jobs were hard to come by, about how asking questions about things that weren't your business could make your business very complicated. It wasn't a threat. It was never explicitly a threat. But Hollis understood it as one anyway. "He knew I'd be scared," Hollis said. "He knew I'd protect my pension over doing the right thing." And he was right. Iris was writing the entire time, fast, efficient handwriting, capturing everything. "The other 22 people on the list," she said, "do you have their names?" Hollis pulled out his phone, opened an app, showed her a spreadsheet. 23 names, ages 12 to 17, last known addresses, all of them within a 300-foot radius of the parcels Ashford had purchased. All of them stuck in administrative review for 11 months while Hollis held the emails that would have placed them. Iris took a photo of the screen with her prepaid phone, checked to make sure the image was clear. "Casey Brennan," she said. "What happened to him?" Hollis's face changed, something that looked like shame. "Casey was on the list 26 months ago, number 3. He started calling my office every week. Wanted to know why he wasn't getting placed. Said he'd go to the press if someone didn't give him answers." "What did you do?" "I told Ashford. Ashford said he'd handle it. Said the system had ways of processing people who made noise." "What does that mean, processing?" "I didn't know at the time. Thought it meant Ashford would move him off the list, maybe get him placed somewhere else, make the problem go away." Hollis looked out the window at the empty parking lot. Dawn was starting to break, gray light turning the world visible again. 3 weeks later, Casey stopped calling, Hollis said. "I checked his file. His foster care stipend had been redirected. Housing assistance too. All of it going to some consulting group I'd never heard of. He left town a month after that." "Where'd he go?" "I don't know. I didn't ask. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore." Iris wrote that down, every word. The specific abdication of responsibility that lets systems fail people while everyone involved tells themselves they're just doing their job. Who else knew? Iris asked. Besides you and Ashford, who else was part of this? Hollis named them. 5 people. Himself at the Housing Authority, a charge nurse at Pine Haven General who gave Ashford access to intake records so he could track which homeless minors were seeking medical care and might be likely to complain. A DSS supervisor who'd close cases without proper investigation when Ashford said the families were fine. A city clerk who expedited permits for Ashford's projects. A council aide who scheduled votes in ways that benefited Ashford's timeline. He built a system, Iris said. She wasn't asking. She was confirming what she'd already figured out. Yes, Hollis said. He built a system, and all of us were part of it because being part of it was easier than standing against it. Iris closed the notebook, looked at Hollis directly. What happens now? Hollis asked. Now you go home, Iris said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., an FBI agent named Harmon Grayson will call you. You tell him everything you told me, exactly the same. You don't leave anything out. You don't protect anyone. You cooperate completely. And if I do that, then the recording I just made becomes evidence that you helped, that you were the first one to talk, that you gave us the names of the other 22 people so we could get them placed. It doesn't make you innocent, but it makes you something other than a coward who only helped when he got caught. Hollis nodded slowly. He looked at Jack, who'd been silent the entire time. You're going to let her do this, Hollis asked. Handle this interview. She's 14. She's the one who built the case, Jack said. We're just making sure people listen to her. Hollis opened the car door, got out, stood in the parking lot for a moment looking back at Iris through the window. I'm sorry, he said. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you were number 8 for 3 months. I'm sorry I kept those emails. I'm sorry I chose my pension over your safety. I know, Iris said, but sorry doesn't give me back the 3 months I spent under a bridge. Sorry doesn't give Casey Brennan back the $69,000 Ashford stole from him. Sorry is just something people say when they want to feel better about what they did. She paused. But cooperation does something. Telling the truth does something. So cooperate, tell the truth, and maybe sorry will start to mean something. Hollis walked to his car, got in, drove away. Jack and Iris sat in the parking lot watching him go. You did good, Jack said. I didn't do anything, Iris said. I just asked him to stop lying. That's harder than you think. For most people. Iris looked down at the notebook, at the new entry she'd just written. The 38th minute of documentation in a project that had started 6 weeks ago when she'd overheard a phone call behind a building and decided it mattered enough to write down. What happens now, she asked. Now we make sure the other 22 people get what they should have gotten 11 months ago, Jack said. And we make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. By 9 a.m., Viper had filed the emergency motion to freeze the city council vote on the Riverside development transfer. Judge Martinez signed it at 9:17, citing documentary evidence of improper influence on the housing allocation process. The vote was postponed indefinitely pending federal investigation. By 10 a.m., Chains had contacted 16 of the 22 people on the waiting list. 11 of them agreed to emergency placement through shelter networks and church programs. The other 5 needed county coordination, but Chains was already on the phone making it happen. By 11 a.m., Numbers had compiled a 12-page financial summary of every dollar Victor Ashford had moved through Garrison Advisory Group, LLC. Every payment from the county, every land purchase, every redirected foster care stipend. The math was airtight. The pattern was undeniable. By noon, Agent Harmon Grayson from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had taken formal statements from Dr. Elena Price, Garrett Hollis, and Nathan Morrison. Had listened to the recording of Iris's interview in the parking lot, had requested a copy of the notebook which Jack had provided, along with a signed chain of custody form to preserve its evidentiary value. By 2 p.m., federal charges against Victor Ashford had expanded from 9 to 14 counts. Wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, bribery of a public official, child welfare fraud, obstruction, and 6 individual counts of theft from foster care recipients, one for each minor whose benefits Ashford had redirected through a shell company. Garrett Hollis received a cooperation agreement at 2:45 p.m. Conditional immunity in exchange for full testimony. His pension would survive if he told the truth. He signed the agreement and immediately provided the FBI with emails, phone records, and internal housing authority documents that showed the exact mechanism by which Ashford had frozen the shelter beds and monitored which minors might complain. The charge nurse who'd given Ashford access to hospital intake records resigned at 3 p.m. The DSS supervisor was placed on administrative leave at 3:30. The city clerk and council aide were both issued subpoenas by 4 p.m. By 5 p.m., the church benevolence fund that Ashford had controlled was frozen. $47,300 earmarked for shelter operations. Restitution to the victims was being calculated. Casey Brennan in Asheville had been contacted by a victim advocate. He'd agreed to testify. The system that Ashford had built over 18 months was coming apart in less than 12 hours. Not because anyone had done anything dramatic, but because one 14-year-old girl had decided that being invisible didn't mean being powerless, and had spent 6 weeks writing down everything she saw. Iris spent most of that day at the shelter, filling out paperwork, meeting with an intake coordinator, getting assigned a room with an east-facing window that got morning light. The room had a bed and a desk and a closet and a door that locked from the inside. It was the first time in 2 months she'd been inside a room that was hers. The first time in 2 years she'd had a door that locked in a way that meant safety instead of confinement. She sat on the bed for a long time just feeling the mattress under her. The way it didn't shift when she moved. The way it held her weight without her having to calculate whether it would collapse. Small things, ordinary things, things that most people never thought about because they'd never had to. There was a knock on the door at 6 p.m. She opened it to find Owen Cross standing there with a tablet in his hands. "Viper," Iris said. "Hey kid, got something for you." He handed her the tablet. It was refurbished but functional, had a case to protect it, had legal research apps already installed. "You're good at finding things," Viper said. "Don't stop." Iris took the tablet, didn't know what to say. Viper seemed to understand that. "Emergency motion got signed this morning," he said. "City council vote is frozen. Ashford's development project is dead. And there's a good chance the parcels he bought get reclassified as housing trust property, which means they could be used for transitional housing instead of luxury condos." "Because of the notebook?" Iris asked. "Because you didn't stop looking," Viper said. "Most people would have given up after week 2, told themselves it didn't matter, that they couldn't do anything about it. You didn't do that." He turned to leave, stopped at the door. "If your school tries to access your old records without going through proper channels, call me first. I put my number in the tablet. Don't wait. Don't let them process you into something you are not." He left. 30 minutes later, there was another knock. Derek Sullivan this time, chains. He handed her a prepaid phone with 2 numbers already programmed. His number and the shelter's after-hours line. "You need something you call," Chains said. "Day or night, doesn't matter." He also handed her a bus pass, unlimited monthly. 22 other people got placed this week, he said. "You'll probably want to check on them eventually. Make sure they're okay. This'll get you around." "Why would I check on them?" Iris asked. "Because you're the one who found them," Chains said. "You're the one who made sure they got counted. People remember that." Iris looked at the phone and the bus pass. Small things, practical things. The kind of help that doesn't announce itself, but that makes survival possible. "Thank you," she said. Chains nodded and left. At 7 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. It was Carl Trent. Numbers. Church Benevolence Fund, $47,300 going to shelter operating budget. Also $127,000 in restitution from Ashford assets being split among 23 waitlist people. Your share $5,520. Account opens next week. Iris stared at the message. $5,520. More money than she'd ever had. More money than she'd thought about having. Her first instinct was to text back and say she didn't need it, that it should go to someone else, that she was fine. But she stopped herself, thought about what numbers had said once about survival, that keeping money you're owed isn't selfish, that surviving isn't selfish. She texted back, "Thank you." The response came 30 seconds later. "You did the work. We just followed the money." At 7:30, there was another knock. This time it was Nathan Morrison. Spike. He didn't come in, just stood in the doorway. "I left something for you at the school," he said. "With the guidance counselor. It's a resource guide for supporting students who've experienced homelessness. Has my number at the bottom if they want to call." "Why would they call you?" Iris asked. "Because I used to be a caseworker. Because I know what the system looks like from the inside. Because sometimes schools want to help, but they don't know how." "Know how?" He looked at her directly. "You're going to have days where it feels hard, where being inside feels wrong because you got used to being outside, where trusting adults feels impossible because adults have been failing you for 2 years. When those days happen, call someone. Don't try to handle it alone. You're not alone anymore." He left before she could respond. The last visitor came at 8 p.m. Jack Mercer and a 7-year-old boy carrying something folded in his arms. "This is Silas," Jack said. "He wanted to give you something." Silas stepped forward, held out what he was carrying. It was a hoodie, army green, 2 sizes too large, both sleeves intact. "It's mine," Silas said, "but Dad said you might want it because yours has a missing part." Iris took the hoodie, felt the weight of it, the warmth. "Thank you," she said. "You already said sorry for being cold," Silas said with the complete seriousness of a 7-year-old who'd spent time thinking about this. "I'm giving you this so you don't have to be sorry anymore." Iris looked at him, at this kid who'd been quiet for 3 miles because he'd understood she needed to concentrate, who'd asked once if she was cold and hadn't asked again when she'd said not right now. Who'd made the decision at 7 years old that her comfort mattered more than his questions? "That's different from thank you," Iris said. "I know," Silas said. "Dad explained it." Jack handed her something else, a laminated photograph. It showed Iris sitting in a hospital conference room that afternoon, her notebook open in front of her, talking to Agent Grayson, while he took notes. Jack had taken the photo without her noticing. The back had an inscription in Jack's handwriting, evidence. "Keep this one too." "You already have a laminated photo from 7th grade, Jack said. "Now you have one from today. Different person, same girl." Iris looked at the photo for a long time. At herself in a room full of federal agents and lawyers, being taken seriously, being listened to, being treated like someone who mattered. She set it on the desk next to the 7th grade photo. 2 versions of herself, before and after, the distance between them measured in 2 years and 3 miles and 90 seconds in a notebook written in the dark. "I couldn't find my sister," Jack said quietly. "Looked for 28 years. Never found her. But you," he paused, "you found yourself, found the girl everyone else stopped looking for. That's harder." Iris didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Jack and Silas left. Iris closed the door, locked it, sat on the bed in a room that was hers, in a building that was warm, in a city that had finally stopped pretending she didn't exist. She opened the notebook to the first blank page, wrote a new entry. Day 1, shelter placement confirmed. Room faces east. Morning light comes in around 6:47 a.m. Things I have: bed, desk, window. Door that locks, phone, tablet. Bus pass, hoodie. New both sleeves. Notebook, same 2 photos, before and after. Things I don't need to count any more nights since last slept inside. Things I'm counting now, days since I started rebuilding. people who didn't look away, reasons to keep going. She closed the notebook, set it on the desk next to the photos and the tablet and the phone. The archive of 6 weeks that had changed 23 lives, including her own. Outside the window, the October night was settling in, cold and clear. The kind of night she would have spent under a bridge 2 days ago, calculating warmth and safety in the specific mathematics of survival. But tonight she was inside, tonight she was warm, tonight she was safe. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance against 2 years of what she'd survived. But it was something, and tomorrow there would be more. There would be school enrollment and caseworker meetings and the slow process of building a life out of the pieces she'd been carrying. Tomorrow. But tonight she was just going to sleep in a bed that didn't move when she did and wake up in a room that got morning light and remember that invisible didn't mean powerless. 10 months later, Iris Kane stood in front of the Pine Haven City Council and gave a 3-minute public comment about the new housing allocation oversight protocol. She was 15 now, had been living in a transitional housing unit for 7 months, had earned a B in earth science and an A in English, had been asked by her teacher if she'd ever considered submitting something to the school literary magazine. She was considering it. The 3-minute comment was about numbers, about what 11 months meant when you were on a waiting list, about what 23 meant when you were talking about beds that could have been filled but weren't, about what number 8 meant when you were the person stuck there while men made money off your invisibility. She didn't mention her own name, didn't make it about her story, made it about the system that had failed and the new system that was supposed to work better, and the specific differences between before and after that mattered to people who needed shelter and safety and the basic dignity of being counted. The council chair thanked her when she finished. She nodded and sat down. There was a man in the 4th row who'd come specifically to hear her speak. His name was Alvin Grayson, retired DSS caseworker, uncle of the FBI agent who'd taken her statement. He had filed 2 complaints in his 40-year career about the same issues Iris had documented. Both complaints had been buried. Both times he had been told it wasn't his responsibility to question how the system worked. He met Iris's eyes across the room when she sat down, gave her a small, specific nod. The kind of nod that meant, I see you, I know what you did, I know what it cost. She nodded back. The new oversight protocol that got filed 11 months after Victor Ashford's arrest was built from 3 sources: Nathan Morrison's 2-year-old complaint, Owen Cross's legal brief, and Alvin Grayson's 40 years of institutional memory about all the ways systems fail people when nobody's watching. It required monthly third-party audits of all emergency shelter allocations, mandatory escalation within 72 hours of any hold order exceeding 5 days, quarterly reporting to the City Council, public access to waiting list data, and a whistleblower protection clause for anyone who reported irregularities. In the first 3 months after the new protocol took effect, 27 people were placed in emergency shelter. 3 of them were teenagers. One was a 16-year-old girl who'd been on the list for 7 months. The report listed her as Case 14. Iris read that report the night it was published, underlined Case 14 with a pen, sat at her desk in the east-facing room, and thought about a girl she'd never met who was sleeping inside tonight because someone had decided the system needed to work better. She opened a new notebook. This one had a red cover, no water damage, no electrical tape. She'd bought it at a drugstore with money from her part-time job at the school library. Inside the front cover, she'd laminated a new photo. Not the 7th grade picture, not the hospital conference room picture. This one was from a Hells Angels cookout in the spring. Samuel Hayes had taken it. Iris was laughing at something Silas had said. Her hair was loose. She wasn't smiling for the camera. She was just laughing. She wrote the first entry in the new notebook. Case 14 placed. Removed from wait list after 7 months. Name redacted for privacy. Age 16. She's going to be okay. I made sure someone's looking. 7 years later, Iris Kane was 22 years old and working as a housing advocate For the Pine Haven Legal Aid Society, she graduated from community college with an associate's degree in public policy, had applied for the job the week after graduation, had written in her cover letter that she understood the housing system from both sides and that maybe that perspective mattered. They'd hired her immediately. She was good at the work, good at reading intake forms and seeing the patterns, good at recognizing when someone was being processed instead of helped, good at asking the right questions and documenting the answers in ways that made them hard to ignore. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Reed was sitting in the waiting area of the legal aid office when a girl walked in, 15 years old, jacket 2 sizes too large, left hand in her pocket closed around something, looking at the floor instead of the door because looking at the door makes you look like you're planning to run, and people who look like they're planning to run get treated differently. Iris had sat exactly like that for 2 years. She crossed the waiting room, didn't take the chair across from the girl, took the one beside her, sat for a moment looking in the same direction. "You've been here a while," Iris said. The girl looked at her sideways, wary. "The intake process takes longer than it should," Iris said. "There are people working on that. It's still too long." She paused. "Is there somewhere you need to be that you can't be right now because you're here?" The girl blinked. "What?" "I mean, is there a reason you have to leave before this is done? If there is, I can help you hold your place. Make sure you don't lose your spot in line." The girl looked at her fully for the first time. The measuring look, the calculation that runs on every adult before you decide if they're safe. "I don't have somewhere to be," the girl said quietly. "I don't have anywhere." "Okay," Iris said, "then you have time." She took out her notebook, the red one, opened it to a blank page. "I'm going to write down your name and your situation, and we're going to make sure nothing falls through the processing gap. Can you tell me your name?" The girl told her. Iris wrote it down, added the date beside it the way Mrs. Eleanor Voss had taught her in 7th grade, the way 2 years of carrying a notebook had taught her, the way she'd learned that if you're not believed the first time, the date matters for the second. "I'm Iris," she said, "and I work here. I was on a shelter waiting list when I was your age, for 11 months. I know what that list feels like from the inside." She said it simply, information, not performance. The girl looked at the notebook, at the pen, at the date written beside her name. "Did you get a place?" she asked. "Eventually," Iris said, "and the person who made sure I did was someone who refused to look away. That's what I'm here for now, to not look away." She stayed in that waiting room for 90 minutes. When the intake worker finally called the girl's name, Iris walked her to the desk and stood beside her and didn't leave until everything was properly documented. Until the girl understood that someone was staying, that she didn't have to hold this alone. Iris recognized the moment the girl's shoulders dropped slightly, the specific release of weight that happens when you realize you don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. She'd worn that expression once, on a plastic chair in a hospital lobby, for the first time in 2 years. She'd been learning to recognize it ever since. That night, Iris drove past Riverside Park, the same route she'd walked 7 years ago, carrying a 7-year-old boy through October cold. The fountain was still there. The paths were still lit. The bridge at the east end still stood where the light didn't quite reach. She parked and walked down to the embankment where her tent had been. There was nothing there now, no sign that anyone had ever slept in that spot. No marker or memorial, just grass and dirt and the ordinary indifference of a place that had moved on. She stood there for a while thinking about the girl in the waiting room that afternoon, about case 14 from the report 3 months ago, about the 23 people who'd been stuck on a list while one man built an empire on top of their invisibility. She thought about a notebook written in the dark, about 90 seconds counted under a bridge, about the specific mathematics of survival that nobody teaches you, but that you learn anyway, when the world stops being a place that keeps you and becomes a place you have to navigate alone. She thought about Jack Mercer, who still did a database search every Monday morning, looking for a sister who'd been gone for 35 years now. who told her once that searching taught you to recognize absence, to see the shape of people who'd been erased, to understand that most disappearances don't look dramatic, they just look like names stuck on lists in beds marked as under review, and systems working exactly as they're designed to work. She thought about the choice she'd made 7 years ago, to pick up a stranger's child instead of staying hidden, to walk 3 miles instead of waiting for someone else to help, to write down what she saw instead of pretending she hadn't seen it. The hardest choice had been the easiest, because the alternative was becoming someone who could watch a child bleed and decide it wasn't her problem. And she'd spent 2 years surviving, but she'd never spent a single day being that person. She walked back to her car, started the engine, pulled out onto the street. Tomorrow she'd go to work. She'd sit with people who needed help navigating systems that were designed to be navigated by people who already had resources. She'd write down their names and their situations. She'd make sure nothing fell through the cracks. She'd be the person who didn't look away. But tonight she drove home to an apartment with an east-facing window that got morning light, parked in a spot that was hers, walked upstairs to a door that locked in a way that meant safety, made tea in a kitchen that had heat, sat at a table with the old notebook open beside the new one. 2 notebooks, 7 years apart. The distance between them measured in miles and moments, and the accumulated weight of every small choice that had brought her from there to here. She opened the new notebook, wrote an entry. Girl in waiting room today. Same look I had 7 years ago. Same calculation running behind her eyes. Same question, is this one safe or not? I stayed with her through intake. Made sure she got documented, made sure someone was looking. She's going to be okay. I'll make sure of it. Because someone did that for me once. Because invisible doesn't mean powerless. Because the system only works when people refuse to let it fail. She closed the notebook, set it on the table next to the old one. 2 archives, 2 versions of the same story, before and after. The girl who survived and the woman who made sure others could too. Outside the window, October was settling into the city, cold and clear. The same weather that had split her arm open 7 years ago when she'd torn off her own sleeve to save a stranger. But tonight she was warm. Tonight she was safe. Tonight she was exactly where she needed to be. And tomorrow morning the sun would come through that east-facing window the way it always did. And she'd wake up and make coffee and go to work and sit with someone who needed help. And she'd write down their name and the date, and she'd make sure someone was paying attention. Because that's what you do when you've been invisible and you've learned to see. You make sure nobody else disappears. You make sure the system counts everyone. You make sure that when someone is hurting, someone shows up. Not because it's easy, not because it pays well, not because anyone asks you to, but because you remember what it felt like to be number 8 on a list that never moved. You remember counting to 90 under a bridge. You remember writing in the dark because nobody else was watching. And you decide that nobody else should have to remember those things alone. The city kept moving outside her window. Cars on streets, lives in houses, the ordinary machinery of a place that mostly worked for most people most of the time. But in the gaps between mostly and always, in the spaces where the system failed and people fell through, there were still names on lists and beds under review, and children learning to count seconds before they felt safe enough to move. Iris couldn't fix all of it, couldn't save everyone, couldn't make the world into something it wasn't, but she could write down names, could make sure people got counted, could be the person who didn't look away when looking away would have been easier. That was enough. It had to be enough. Because sometimes the only difference between invisible and visible is whether someone decides you're worth seeing. And Iris Kane had decided a long time ago, sitting on a hospital floor with one torn sleeve and a notebook full of evidence, that everyone was worth seeing. She just had to make sure everyone else remembered that too.